And you guys, referring to the mafia, you guys have your own reason for wanting to get rid of Castro. You know, they've thrown out the Batista regime, who is your partner in the heroin trafficking. They've closed down all the gambling casinos, the prostitution houses and stuff all through Cuba. So you have your own reason for wanting to kill him. So the president would like you to do this. So Johnny Roselli goes back to Chicago and meets with Sam Giancana and tells him that Nixon wants this assassination team put together, and Howard Hughes is going to be authorizing this. So at that point, Sam Giancana says, well, wait a second, if we're going to do this, if we're going to kill Castro, that's in Cuba, that's Santo Traficante's territory. And Santo Traficante is the don of the mafia in Cuba, now in exile in Tampa. So they go down and have a set of meetings. They have 3 meetings that take place from June 15th to June 21st of 1960 at the Fontainebleau Hotel down in Miami. And in the meetings are Sam Giancana, Johnny Roselli, Santo Traficante, and Robert Mayhew are all there. There's an agreement in principle on the part of Sam Giancana and Traficante that in principle they'll go ahead and do this, but they want to make certain that this is coming from the president and not just a pipe dream of Bob Mayhew or Howard Hughes. And so they insist that some representative of the president come to the next meeting to confirm this. They have this next meeting, and a man comes using the nom de guerre of Mr. Ed. It turns out this is Sheffield Edwards. Sheffield Edwards was the chief of security for the Central Intelligence Agency out of the Miami station down in Miami at JM Wave. He gives the nod to go ahead and do this. So what they did, what Sam Giancana and Santo Traficante did, very wisely, what they did, they selected 15 gunmen who, in fact, were gunmen for Santo Traficante, who had been gunmen that protected their casinos and their heroin trafficking, etc., who then, as of June of 1960, were working with the American Central Intelligence Agency in a thing called Operation Mongoose, which was a covert CIA program supervised by Richard Nixon to attempt to overthrow the government of Castro. And they were running boats in and blowing up bridges and burning sugar plantations and poisoning crops, etc. And this was called Operation 40, was the code name for this. So what Santo Traficante did is he retained to participate in this assassination team 15 men who were all anti-Castro Cubans who had worked for him, but were at the present time working for the CIA. So he could bring them in to participate in this assassination team, and if anything happened that any one of them got discovered, the CIA would probably move in to try to protect them being revealed, because they were afraid that it would look like it was the CIA doing this, which it turns out it was not as such. So they put this team together, the 15 of them, and they were called the S-Force. S is in Sam, the S-Force. There were 15 men on it. The major shooter of which was David Morales. There was Rafael Chichi Quintero, Ricardo Chavez, Rolando Martinez. There were the Suez brothers. There were 15 of these guys. Jose Posada Correa was one of the guys. They were all anti-Castro, rabid anti-Castro, right-wing Cubans, and they participated in this. What was done is they spread these 15 men out in 5 paramilitary camps that were based along the southwestern United States. There was one on Star Island, just off Florida. There was one on Swan Island. There was one in the Everglades, and there were 2 at Lake Pontchartrain outside of New Orleans. And the 15 men were divided up among all 5 of these camps, so they were not in one place together. And what they would do is they would gather these men up in private planes and fly them to Fort Huachuca in Arizona. And they would then disappear off the rolls of being signed into Fort Huachuca, and then they would take them secretly and fly them down to Oaxaca, Mexico. They'd fly them down to Oaxaca, Mexico, to a ranch that was owned by Clint Murchison. Clint Murchison is the son of the man who owned the Santa Anita racetrack in California, where John Edgar Hoover used to go all the time for free. And there was a ranch that they owned down in Oaxaca, Mexico. This was made the Triangular Fire Team base, where they were training a Triangular Fire Team assassination group, these 15 men, to kill Castro and the other Cubans. And this particular base was funded, this becomes important, it was funded by a skim of cash off the casinos in Las Vegas that Marcella out of New Orleans was in charge of. They would skim the money off the casinos, the cash money, so that it couldn't be traced. They would drive it in huge boxes in cars, in the trunks of cars, all the way to Miami, and they would deposit it in the Miami National Bank that was owned by Meyer Lansky. And then they would wire the money to the International Credit Bank in Geneva, Switzerland, owned by a man by the name of Gaillon. And then they would wire it down into the Mexican bank, into Banco Internacional, down in Mexico City, and put it into an account of a man by the name of Ogario, who was an attorney in Mexico City. And this is the place from which all of the costs for the Triangular Fire Team base were all covered by, out of this bank account in the Banco Internacional of an attorney by the name of Ogario. This whole operation was rolling in place when, lo and behold, Richard Nixon did not get elected president in November of 1960, but instead John Kennedy was actually elected and appointed his brother Bobby as the Attorney General, as we all recall. And when they found out that there was this Operation 40 that was going on, attempting to overthrow the Castro government, and that Nixon had agreed that as soon as he came into office in January of 1961, they were going to transmute Operation 40 into an actual military invasion of Cuba. They were actually going to send ashore a team of anti-Castro Cubans, and they were going to set up a beachhead at the Bay of Pigs, announce that they were a new freedom-liberated government, and Nixon was going to send in the United States Marine Corps into Cuba to overthrow the Castro government and declare a free government and put Batista back into power and put the mafia back into power to be handling the heroin trade again, because it was the income from the heroin trade, part of it, that was funding the Kuomintang, the KMT, the nationalist Chinese, that was all set up by the Central Intelligence Agency. This was their covert means of funding. This was the plan. But what happened, long story, but what happened is when they messed up at the Bay of Pigs and the invasion collapsed, Kennedy was upset about this, and as you recall, he said he was going to stop this kind of operations against Cuba, informed the Soviet Union, Khrushchev, that this was his mistake, that he allowed this to go forward, and he promised Khrushchev that there would be no more efforts to overthrow the Cuban government. Well, it turns out that was not true either, because all they did in the Kennedy administration was transformed it from Operation 40. They renamed it Operation Mongoose and ran the Mongoose operation against Castro. Well, but the Kennedy brothers, this is extremely important to understand, did not